comic book writer of all time. So it just wins. Some people do say this, and that well, that's some person's me. So that's how I build the credentials. As I say, some people say this, and of course, if I am some people, so it works out. I still think you're the greatest comic writer of all time.
Oh, not even close. Not even close.
Not even close?
Oh, no,
well,
no. There are, oh, gosh. If I start naming all the guys that are so much better than me, it'll take up the whole interview.
You're too nice.
No, I'm still learning how to do
it. Me too. So maybe you can help me, and actually some of my audience here are definitely into comic writers, and we'll drill into what makes a great comic story at some point. For those who don't know who Tom is for real, should I call you Tom? Should I call you Mr. DeFalco? Is this are we formal? I don't know.
I usually go by Your Royal Highness, but we can stick with Tom.
Okay, his royal Tomness. All right. And he comes from the greatest comic book of all time, which is of course Spider-Girl. And that's what he's most famous for. And everybody loves Spider-Girl. And I've got these new complete collections, which are, I got a rag on volume 1 here. They had a bad printer on this one that like the pages fall out of the book and stuff like that. Volume 2, they fixed it. So they have a better printer on volume 2. But I've also got it in these handy dandy digest versions, which have really good paper and really thick paper. Even though it's a lot smaller to read the print, these have held up for 10 years. So 20 years? When did these start coming out? Long time ago.
Yeah, a very long time ago.
Now, I did a Wikipedia entry. Now, Tom has also done things like Amazing Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and Thor and Archie. And
Superman and Batman and
Superman and Batman. Those minor characters you might have heard of. Now I read on Wiki, because I wanted to look things up and be informed, that when you started in the industry, you actually started as an assistant editor at Archie. This is long time ago. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I started in the Archie bullpen. I don't think I actually had a title at that stage. I eventually became an assistant editor, or actually the editor of the digest books. But we weren't hung up on titles at Archie in those days. There were only 3 or 4 of us editing one time. So.
Now the wiki credits you with really spearheading those digest versions. Is that do you remember much about how those came about? Or because I know I've seen those in supermarkets for forever.
Yes, this was my act of genius. I stole the idea from Western Publishing, or I guess it was Gold Key at the time. Western, I'm not exactly sure, but I think that it was publishing on the Gold Key at that time, and they started doing these digest books, and I saw them, and I thought, this is a perfect vehicle for the Archie comics, because our artwork would reduce to the proper size, and the balloons would be readable. So I mentioned it to my boss, a gentleman by the name of Victor Gorelick, who recently passed away, been with Archie for 60 plus years. And Victor said, I don't know, this looks like a lot of work. And he said, man, you know what, mention it to Mr. Goldwater next time he came in. John Goldwater was the owner of the company. And I would often throw ideas at Mr. Goldwater, and he would throw them back at me. And I suggested, I said, hey, Mr. Goldwater, what do you think that we take this idea and do our bunch of digest covers? And he said, what are you, out of your mind? Where are we going to get that material? We've got tons of material. Oh, it looks like too much work. Oh, forget about it. There's no way we could sell that on comic book racks. And I thought, okay, I don't know what, how Gold Key is selling them, but they keep coming out with them. And about a week later, Mr. Goldwater came in. He says, I have this brand new project, and I think this could be our future. And he hands me the digest book that I had handed him the week ago. Said, "We're now going to do these books." And I said, "Okay." And then Victor Gorelick turned to me and said, "This is your mess. You're in charge now." And for years I did the digest books at Archie.
Nice. And those, I guess that sold pretty well for them since they kept doing it.
They're still doing
it. Yeah. Cool.
Right now, the digest books, I think, are the only publications Archie's doing that features classic Archie.
Okay. What's the features classic Archie exactly?
Well, when I say features classic Archie, they do
the old ones.
Yeah, they have the old stories, plus they do brand new stories featuring the classic Archie characters, as opposed to the.
Okay, neat.
Yeah, these days a lot of the Archie characters have been converted into horror comics. I don't know what else to say. Jughead is a werewolf, Veronica's a vampire, Archie's dealing with in Afterlife of Archie, he's dealing with zombies. So it's a whole new world.
Yeah. Different takes all the way around. So is this why Marvel started doing the digests of these, and like what else it was like Runaways at the time, and there was another, it's like Sentinel I think was the third digest also coming out. Were you saying, hey, this worked pretty well at Archie, let's try this to revitalize sales, or
no, I
had nothing to do with it?
I had absolutely nothing to do with it. I think Marvel had approached Scholastic Books, and Scholastic Books said, do you have material that is appropriate for our audience? And they looked around, and that's why they came up with it. It was Sentinel and Runaways, and then they just came up with Spider-Girl. And I don't know how the other book sold, but Spider-Girl was selling over 100,000 copies a book.
No way, really? That high? I didn't know that.
Yeah, we became Marvel's best-selling trade paperback for a while, which endeared me to so many other people who were producing, sophisticated, classy stuff. And here, this old bum is doing Spider-Girl and outselling us all 4-1. It was an interesting time.
That's funny. Now, I guess the dynamics were really changing, I guess, for comic storytelling in the late 90s, 2000s, as the industry kind of was trying to refine its footing after the 90s. And so you still stuck to, which is why I really identified with this and got big into this in the late 90s there. But you stuck with that classic, you tell a story in an issue. You're building this soap opera world, with the supporting cast and all that. But it really is self-contained stories that build this this character over time. And this is an era where everybody's really moving to that graphic novel sort of 6-issue decompressed storyline that isn't really designed for single issues. So I mean, was there friction with trying to stick with that sort of format when trying to do this at all, or did it matter? Were you kind of given a license to do what you wanted?
Every once in a while, every time we got a new editor, they would talk to us about trying to modernize everything. And then we would point out that everything that was modernized was selling under what we were doing. So we thought, what we're doing is working. And, storytelling is storytelling. The concept of having subplots and a supporting cast and a big soap opera element, that works if you're doing comic books, you're doing television, if you're doing novels. In movies, the subplots all have to tie up at the end of the movie, and everybody, the B story, C story, D stories, everybody has to tie up. But you have a very strong soap operatic feeling in most movies, even the James Bond movies. Look back, what we're always concerned is what's going to happen with James and the girl.
Definitely, every time.
So yeah,
it gets us every time.
It gets us every time. I often, smile when people talk about Stan Lee's biggest contribution, because they think it's bringing in characters with feet of clay. But no, Stan Lee's biggest contribution was he introduced soap opera to comics, and he made us care about the characters, and he made us care about the supporting cast. We were just as concerned with Peter Parker's private life as we are with his life as Spider-Man.
Almost more so. There's been times where I skip over the fight scenes to try to find out what's happening with Mary Jane or whatnot.
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. When Ron Friends and I were assigned Spider-Man, we had this talk and said, there should be a 60-40 split every issue between Spider-Man stuff and Peter Parker stuff. And every once in a while, it's 60% Peter Parker and 40% Spider-Man. And every once in a while with issues, we didn't even get to the 40% Spider-Man. And nobody cared because they were, deeply involved in the soap opera. I think if Spider-Girl owes its success to any one thing, I think it was the never-ending soap opera, the supporting cast, and the fact that every member of the supporting cast had their own stories going on. We cared about Moose, we cared about Jimmy Yama,
yep.
We cared about all of the different characters. I will tell you, as a writer, that's a lot of work. keeping it all coordinated. I had a big chart on my wall to make sure I knew where everybody was and what was happening to them.
So you did. So would there be like 4 or 5 issues you realize, I haven't even touched Courtney in 4 or 5 issues. I better write something in, or? Yeah,
well, we had so many characters. People look at Spider-Girl as a single character book, but we had so many characters that we had to keep touching base with.
It was a full universe, and when it launched, you actually had kind of a full universe going, because you had that Avengers Next series going, and J2, which I had not read J2.
You've not read J2? Oh,
no, I did
goodness.
Now. I read it last year, and I was like, and once I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is almost even better than Spider-Girl. How did I miss this? But it was a really cool thing at the start, and then you had to condense all that into one book. I imagine that was pretty challenging.
Yeah, but that's why they pay us the mediocre bucks.
Nice.
Yeah, J2 is such an odd comic book.
Yeah.
I remember telling Ron Lim, we're going to break every rules of superhero comic books in here, and we're just going to have a good time. And if anybody complains, then you just blame me, because And then Ron said, "Nah, I'm part of this. And I used to think I knew when a J2 plot worked, because a couple of times Ron Lim would call me up and said, I want to talk to you about this plot, and burst into laughter and say, I wanted this scene where he, and then burst into laughter again. And I would say, Ron, the book is working for you, huh? And all he do is just laugh and said, I got to get together and then we'll talk. Because the purpose was, we wanted to have a fun time.
Good.
And we did.
And I think that's where a lot of, I just feel like a lot of comics these days, maybe the last 20 years, have lost a lot of that fun factor. And that's what draws me to your stuff is it just feels like you're just don't even care. It's like it's you just want to do something cool and to make you laugh and just to have some fun action or something like that. And I don't know, when I miss that in comics. I miss that feeling a lot with newer stuff these days. Gosh, I'd say newer stuff, but it's really 30 years at this point. We've had a 30-year span of just trying to deconstruct the hero, to try to make them darker, to try to make them edgier. It's like you're talking about with Archie. It's like you can't just have an Archie comic now. It has to be like a Archie with a werewolf like twist now. That, I don't know, how did comics get away from that, and do you think that contributes to sort of the upheavals we see in the industry a lot?
Probably. I think that the problem was, for many, many years, people who worked in comics, they felt like the redhead stepchild. They had a chip on their shoulder. Comic books aren't just for kids. And I can't tell you how many times I saw that ad or saw that thing. Comics aren't for kids anymore. They're not just for kids. And then in the course of that, they forgot, well, comic books should be for kids too.
Right.
I love the medium. I still love the medium. Any chance I get to work in comics, I latch on to, even though I really shouldn't. But I love the medium. I love comics. I love a lot of the old characters that I dealt with. And I still have a great time with comics. I used to feel we were doing comic books for 16-year-olds of all ages.
Nice.
Both
yeah,
those,
that feels right.
Yeah. These days, people want to do deep, significant, important things, and they're using superheroes to do that. And whenever I feel like trying to write something deep and significant, and I'm a very shallow person, so that doesn't happen often. But I turn to other media, because I think other media works better. To really express your deepest, most intimate thoughts. Sometimes poetry works better. Sometimes novels work better.
You can express some deep things in superhero. Even maybe by accident.
Absolutely.
I feel like
not so much by accident.
Maybe not by accident. Yeah. I feel like the struggle with the May version and her parents and really struggling to fill your parents' shoes and feel like you're, feel like you're doing something, feel like you're as important as a person as the generation before. I mean, that's something that relates to all of us, right? I mean, we all kind of, whether it's our parents we look up to, or, whether it's, comic writers before, like yourself, I don't think I'll ever be able to write stories as well as you can. I mean, to be honest.
You probably do better than me. You're the next generation. You should do better than me.
I don't know about that. It is a struggle that you feel internally, though, and that's how you relate. And I feel like that is a deep concept. Deep doesn't have to be dark and edgy, and to me, you can have uplifting and deep. And that's what I like to feel out of comics. And I think when you get into Stan, you really dial back into Stan's comics, he's got that deepness, and it's always uplifting,
Well, it should be uplifting. I don't know about you, but if I had the ability to walk on walls or fly or web swing across the city, I'd be having a hell of a great time. I'd be enjoying myself. And I have to refer to Ron Frenz a lot, because most of the good ideas in the comic books came from him. I just ride on his coattails. But I would always say to Ron, let's always have a moment where the character is having a great time using his powers, because, man, if you had these powers, you should be having a great time. If you're not, there's something wrong with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree with that sentiment a lot. And I think the early comics really had that, I call it, in the science fiction writing realm, we call it, the sense of wonder that came out of that era, that it just seemed like everything was kind of an eye-opening and wow, we're really looking at the world around us and saying there's a lot of beautiful and interesting things here. And I don't know, I like that feeling. I try to capture that feeling in entertainment as much as I can. And I don't want entertainment to make me feel bad. My back already hurts, Right?
Yeah, the depressing thing I do every day is turn on the news.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're
I stopped
providing
doing that, and let me tell you, it's great.
we are providing entertainment, and our goal, certainly in comics, novels, whatever the heck, you're taking the reader's money, and even more important, you're taking their time up. You better be worth that money and time. So
Yeah.
entertain them, let them have a good time. I very rarely want to go to a serious drama in terms of a movie. I love going to comedies. I love going to what I refer to as foolish action films, because those are the James Bond, the Fast and Furious, the Marvel movies. I just want to go and just be entertained and sit in the audience and go, ooh, ah, wow, and just laugh and enjoy myself.
Same.
The world can be depressing enough.
Absolutely. We got one question for you in the chat, which is, what did Tom think of Rick Parker's depiction of him in the Bullpen Bulletin cartoons?
What Bullpen Bulletin cartoons?
I guess back in the day, you remember the Bullpen Bulletin little pages, and then you had a drawing of you to go along with that.
Rick Parker used to make drawings of me.
Did he?
Oh my goodness! I'm shocked. Shocked, I said. I have a couple of them hanging up on my wall.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. When Rick and Steve Saffel came in, they approached Mark Grunwald and me, and they said, we want to do a comic strip called The Boss Men. We said, what? And they said, yeah, we're going to kind of make fun of you and that sort of stuff. And we said, okay. And they gave us the first couple of gags. And Mark and I read them, and we looked at each other and said, no, these are not brutal enough. And we called them in and said, listen, if you guys are gonna insult us and do a comic strip, go wild. I mean, I said, you got to make me a total buffoon who's completely oblivious to everything that's going on. And Mark says, yeah, and I want to be a spineless yes man. And I remember turning to Mark and said, you a spineless yes man. Man, I've dreamed about that day. And we encouraged them to just portray us as horrible as they could. Because where was the fun if they didn't? So they went off and they did the first couple. They showed us their next attempt, and they were funnier, they were sharper, and we said, okay, you don't have to show us anything anymore. Just go and have a good time. And
nice.
And Rick Parker, I think, is just a fabulous cartoonist. His work is beautifully drawn, and he's got such a biting sense of humor. And he's also a great guy. So I'm such a fan of Rick's stuff that I have a couple of Bossman strips, hanging up, on my walls, because I'm a fan.
Beautiful. That's awesome. So George asked if Tom's retiring or continuing comics, and I think this is a good time to show your new work since this just came out last week. It's Machine Man 2020 #1, and Tom is about half of this book. So we got Christos Gage does one story in here, and you do the other one, and it's a 2-issue series. They split the story basically.
Well,
one issue and the next.
Christos, I think, did 20 pages. I did 10 in the book. So
okay.
And I did that, the second issue, and then I think it's called Iron Age. There's another 10-page story.
Now I'm a little bit lost, as I've never read any Machine Man anything, and I don't know what's going on in the current event. I read your backup story before we came on the air here, and it involves a group called the Midnight Wreckers who are kind of fighting in this anti-robot war that's going on. What is Machine Man?
Well, he doesn't happen to appear in those two backup stories.
Right.
But he's a character I worked on 30 years ago, longer. I first worked on Machine Man. He was a living robot who had human emotions. And I first worked on the series with Steve Ditko. And then a bunch of years later, we did this story called Machine Man 2020. And it was Herb Trimpe and I, and later Barry Smith came in to ink it. And this was done in the early 80s, so 2020 was still the future. And, we came up with the Iron Man of 2020 and a bunch of other characters and just had a grand time for ourselves. Theoretically, that 10-page story that you read, you should be able to follow that without knowing who Machine Man was.
There's a definite like backdrop, and you've got basically a roboticist scientist who's kind of like, wait a minute, why are we fighting against these? I guess they're insurgent. How do you want to define it? Rebels of some sort. Scavengers.
Yeah, scavengers. They go around scavenge, robot parts, because they then use those parts to repair other robots.
Yeah. And you talk about deep concepts in here. I mean, there is a little bit of that in that, because you're asking the question, about robotics and at what point it actually becomes life, and at what point we're supposed to respect that, right? That's in there.
Yeah.
And that's interesting, and that's coming up. I mean, we're going to have to really, as humans, answer this pretty quickly here, I feel like.
Yes, I think we are going to have to answer it, especially as we ourselves become more and more robotic. And by that I mean, I got a knee replacement earlier in the year, so I got a metal knee now, and I know people who've replaced both knees, both hips. We're becoming, more and more, cybernetic, and as time goes on, they'll be replacing, whole limbs and things like that. These are questions that we are going to have to answer as time goes on. And how does this affect healthcare and everything else?
Now, do you? So, I mean, you're probably familiar with the whole concept of, but I'm just getting into weird stuff now, if that's okay. The singularity. And have you heard about this in sort of science fiction circles?
Refresh my memory.
No problem. It's a moment where it's, which people say is gonna happen, or maybe already happened for some conspiracy types, where an AI or a computer actually gets that sentient spark of life and like transcends itself and starts to just change things. And at that moment that, it's either going to go Terminator on us, and that's going to be the end of things, or apparently it's going to usher in a utopia. I don't know. But it seems like a lot of these science fiction concepts, like Machine Man, or let's call it the Midnight Wreckers, because it's not really a Machine Man story per se, kind of, play into those tropes.
Well, this whole event, the Iron Man 2020 event, which Machine Man is part of the Iron Man 2020 event, that's exactly what it's discussing.
Nice.
The big question is, do the machines have emotions, or are they programmed with emotions? What is real, what isn't real? And we throw out a bunch of theories, but since I could throw out theories, but I don't know the answer.
Yeah,
I'd rather have the readers figure things out.
Yeah, it's a good way to do things.
Yeah, it's my job to leave you with questions in your mind at the end of the story.
Well, you left me with a cliffhanger, so I have to get the second issue when it comes out for sure.
Oh, good. We sold another issue. Terrific. My editors will be so pleased. The question of retiring, when people ask me that, I tell them I am now semi-retired. I only work 5 days a week these days. I decided at a certain point that I wanted to, on Sundays, I wanted to watch the whole football game. My team's the New York Jets. So people really question why I want to see the Jets lose. But
oof, I'm my condolences. Yeah.
What could I tell you? I claim I take weekends off. Sometimes that's true.
So you're also known for, I mean, editing and of course being editor in chief for a while. Like what do editorial duties look like? I've from being in independent comics, I guess my editors kind of just correct my typos and things like that. But I'm guessing it's very different when you're dealing with these long-term properties.
Well, I can only speak about what editing was in my day when I was doing it. And when I was doing it, you were basically put in charge of a character, put in charge of a title, and it was your responsibility to, as the editor, to think of that character in terms of long range, their long range health, their long range growth, their long range sales. This is in contrast to a writer whose job it is to think in terms of short range. Think of this one story. This is going to be the greatest story you've ever read. It completely changes the character. Okay, but do we want to completely change the character? So writers think short term, editors have to think long term, and there is a natural conflict that exists between the writers and the editors, and there should always be that natural conflict. The editors also have a big club, which is get your work in on time or you're fired, which in my day was a very important thing because we had a lot of newsstand distribution, and if you missed your shipping date, you might as well just pulp that issue.
Now, I listened to an interview with Ron that actually, there's a issue on Amazing Spider-Man there that you guys would apparently get things in on time, but then they'd change the dates afterwards as an excuse to kind of get you off the title there. That was
a crummy editor who thought that if he got us knocked off the book, then he could write the book. Whatever.
You got Thor instead, so it worked out, right?
Oh, that was many months later.
Okay.
Many months later. But that's old history.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
So, as editor and editor in chief, did you have I guess, I don't know, watching the internet nowadays is a different thing. Every time any comic company makes any sort of move whatsoever, it's the end of the world, right? And the internet didn't exist back then. But was there the pressure in letters and things like that when you had, I don't know, any of your events or anything like that, or changes? Did that come down the pipeline just as strongly? Absolutely.
When the world heard that we were going to change Spider-Man's costume, that happened. It's one of the few numbers I know. Issue 252, I think, where Spider-Man got the black costume. The fans went crazy. The fanzines went crazy. At a point before the issue came out, the mailroom guy came in with 2 sacks of mail, which he dropped on my desk. And he said to me in a very threatening fashion, "I don't know what you did, but don't ever do it again." And this was all mail condemning the fact that we were going to change Spider-Man's costume. Everybody was convinced this was going to be the big disaster. Jim Shooter, who was the editor-in-chief at the time, came in to me and said, "What issue does Spider-Man get his new costume?" I said, "Issue 252. He said, "Get rid of it in 253, or sales of Spider-Man are going to tank."
No way.
Absolutely. And I said to him, "Jim, you're supposed to get the costume in issue 8 of Secret Wars. We got to at least keep it till then." He says, "Spider-Man will be dead by that time. We'll have to cancel the book." And I said, "Jim, you can't let people's opinions, before the fact, direct us." I said, we have to at least wait until he gets the costume before we get rid of it. And Shooter said to me, "All right, but this is your butt. If sales go down, you're going to be the one who has to pay for that." And I kind of laughed at that because, I considered myself only the fill-in writer on Spider-Man at the time. I didn't think I'd last all 8 issues anyway. So I thought, okay, yeah, they're going to fire me off the book. They're going to fire me off the book anyway. What do I care? And then after the costume came out, people decided they liked the black costume. And then we started getting all this pro black costume stuff. So that when the issue was coming out, Shooter came into my office and said, are you still planning on getting rid of the black costume? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, no, keep it. Keep it. Everybody loves it. Keep it. And I said, the issue where he gets rid of it is going out of the house next week. And it's too late to change it.
Oh, no.
And he said, how could you do this? And I was thinking, because you told me to get rid of it. And I thought, I said, don't worry about it, Jim. We can always bring it back. No problem. And of course, I had no ideas for bringing it back, but I figured, we'll come up with something. And we did.
Beautiful.
The nice thing about being a comic book writer is you have to be very, very flexible. Very flexible. I think the problem with the internet now is people hear that a title is coming out and they badmouth this title before they've ever read it. And in so many cases, a book is effectively canceled before the first issue has ever seen the light of day.
Oh, I know. It's tragic. And this really bothers me, especially because I really think for the future of comics, I mean, it's great that we have our staples like Thor and Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, but really, companies aren't giving the new characters like a Spider-Girl or whatnot, the real breadth to grow and even enter the public consciousness whatsoever. I mean, if you give something 6, 7 issues and pull the plug, well, you're telling all the comic readership that every time that a new character is coming out, that's all it's getting, and they're pulling the plug, and nothing's going to stick. It's really tough.
Yeah, and it takes characters a while to hit their stride. I was lucky coming into the industry when I did because things sold better, and also we had a newsstand, and the newsstand was both an unforgiving market and a forgiving market, because sometimes things would sell on the newsstand that you couldn't give away in the comic book stores. G.I. Joe, for the first year or so, we could not give that comic book away to direct comic book retailers.
Which is crazy, because that's hailed as some of the better stuff out there, of all time. So
absolutely, and
yeah,
and it was a great book. It was, beautifully written by Larry Hama, one of the great unsung comic book writers. Really a master, Larry Hama.
Yeah, Larry's the action master for sure, 100%.
And he's still doing G.I. Joe, and that comic book was being advertised on television, and we couldn't give it away in the direct stores. But because we had a strong newsstand, this thing was one of our top-selling newsstand books, and it took the direct market about a year to notice it. And then once they noticed it, in the course of 3 months, it went from our worst-selling title to one of our best-selling titles in 3 months.
Wow.
So it was boop, boop, boop. And that's because it took the direct market a year to notice it. I both love and hate the direct market, and love and hate direct market retailers. But, comic book retailers are a cowardly and superstitious lot. They are afraid to increase orders, even when they see that the book is selling out regularly.
Right. Yeah, it's a tough deal. And I always advocate for, especially for indies nowadays, if you're not within that Marvel DC market, really to explore new places like, Kickstarter and Amazon and things like that, where, you can put up an ebook on Amazon and it doesn't really cost you anything to print. So it can just be there for people to discover. And that's a lot easier to sort of like get a wheel churning at this point in a lot of ways than it is to just hope that Diamond will give you their blessing. So I don't know. It's really a tricky situation right now. And of course I go to my comic shop and try to support them as much as I can also. But I don't know where things are heading right now. It's interesting.
Well, and it isn't up to Diamond. Diamond just says, hey, this is what's for sale. Even if they support you and get behind you, doesn't mean the retailers are going to support it and get behind it. I have a retail story. Remember when Carnage came out?
Yep.
Were you around there at that time?
That's about when I started reading comics, when I was a youngin'. So that's how I found you. Yeah.
Okay. Well, around the time that the first Carnage came out, we were getting angry phone calls from retailers. And I came in into my office and found out there was like 12 retailers were furious, and they all wanted to complain to me. And I thought, what the heck's going on? And then one of the retailers I knew called just as I sat down at the desk. So I answered the phone. I said, what's the problem with it? It seems like a bunch of you guys are angry at us. What do we do? And he said, you didn't tell us that this new character, Carnage, was going to be so popular. And I said, what? I said, do we advertise that there's a new character called Carnage? Yeah, but you didn't tell us it was going to be so popular and sell out. All the copies of it sold out within one day. And I said, well, isn't that a good thing? He says, no, I could have sold twice as many copies. As far as I'm concerned, Marvel ripped us off. And I'm thinking, how do we know? We hope that every character we introduce is going to be popular. What am I supposed to do? Say, guys, this time for real, it's going to be a real popular one. And what if it ain't? What if it ain't? Then all you guys get stuck with the book. And I went to the sales department and said, listen, I'm getting a bunch of complaints. They said, yeah, we are too. We're gonna reprint it right now. And I said, you're not going to reprint it to the orders they ask, are you? And they said, no, we're going to reprint whatever number the retailers asked for. We're going to double the print run. I said, okay, great. That print run sold out within a day too.
No way.
We got more complaints. And that's why we had to do a third version. And I think the third version, we tripled their orders, and that sold out too. And they were still angry at us. But what are you going to do? Yeah. I mean, we were trying. We were doing our best.
So was that, I mean, in terms of sales crazes, was when that Carnage sort of thing hit, was that the craziest sales craze that you've seen, or was there another event that really sticks out as something bigger there?
Well, the first issue of Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man, when the sales came in.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one. Yeah,
just kept getting bigger and bigger, and it, I think climaxed with the Jim Lee's X-Men, which sold at this stage of the game, I forget if it was 12 million copies or 15 million copies.
Wow.
And retailers got upset again, because normally they were ordering 500,000 copies of X-Men a month. And when this thing came out, I think we figured out that there were maybe 8 million copies that not 8 million copies, I'm sorry, 800,000 copies that didn't sell out instantly. And retailers were stuck with what were normally, twice the amount of X-Men comics they had. Now, they had also sold, was it 12 times the amount that they normally
right.
12, was it 12 times? No, it was even more than that. I think it was 25 times more than they normally did. But they were, upset about the fact that they got stuck with extra copies. And I remember talking to a guy, and he said, "Yeah, it's an outrage. Marvel should do something." I said, "Come on, who are you kidding? You know, how many copies did you get stuck with? And the guy says, I got like 1,000 copies I'm stuck with. I said, how many copies did you sell? And he said, he said, I don't know the exact number, but see that new Porsche there? That's what I got with my profits. And I said, all right, well then shut the hell up.
Awesome.
And it was
a big part of
it was a slick red convertible Porsche. It was sharp looking. He took me for a ride in
it. Was that a big part of the editor-in-chief duties, is kind of like micromanaging these print run sizes and guesstimating and just trying to figure out where the sweet spot is all the time? Or
not really. Very rarely did I get involved with print run things. Whenever I would go to the printer and stuff, it was more to check the quality of the books, to make sure that they were printing well and that sort of thing. Very rarely did I get involved in things. You know, every once in a while we had a gut instinct that the market hadn't ordered enough books. And whenever we had that gut instinct, we walked in and said, I think you should overprint by, 25%, 50%. Ghostwriter number one, we said 100%. I think it was 100%, might have been 200%. But we kept saying, everybody thinks this new ghostwriter is going to be the same old ghostwriter. They're going to be, pleasantly surprised, and they're going to want more books than they ordered. So, every once in a while I'd get there. Most of the time, what I was doing was trying to figure out what are we going to be publishing next year, and get guys on board for what the future was.
And it's about a year in advance, or at least, or further, at least
a year in advance. When I first became editor-in-chief, I sat down with Mark Grunwald and said, we're going to do something that's never been done in the comic book field before. We're going to make out a 3-year plan. And
awesome.
I said, we're going to introduce a team book in our first year. And in the second year, we're going to spin off one of the characters from the team book into his own title. And Mark said, which character? I said, I don't know. I don't even know what the team book is yet. But we're going to plan to do a new team book and spin it off. And we worked out our publishing plan. And I remember I took it up to the president of the company, and he looked at it, he said, wow, this is impressive. I said, do you think it's going to work? I said, I don't know. Nobody has ever done this before in the comic book industry. We're going to take a shot. We're going to act as if we were real publishers. Because my goal was to make Marvel a real publisher. Up until then, I thought too much of the comic book industry was done, on last minute or reacting to sales or that sort of stuff. And I thought we should be directing things. We should figure out how we're going to grow over the next couple of years. Because I've always felt either you're growing or you're condensing, but you're not staying static. And I felt I wanted the company keep growing. And it growed. It grew.
You need an editor, sir.
Hey, listen. I'm a writer. I communicate better in second draft. But the company grew every year.
So the plan. So what team? But was that the New Warriors?
That ended up to be the New Warriors.
Nice. Yeah, that worked out pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, that worked out very good.
And who'd you spin off from the New Warriors?
I think we spun Night Thrasher off. It was the first character, and then eventually we spun pretty much all the characters from the New Warriors off, just to see see how they do.
That was such a good book. The New Warriors is really some of Marvel's finest. So
yeah. That was written by Fabian Nicieza, drawn by Mark Bagley, and I have never forgiven Fabian for writing that book so much better than I could. I mean, I think it's an outrage. The guy should have had more respect.
Definitely.
He did such a great job, so much better than I could. I just want to strangle him every time I see him. None of that's true.
One question I've been burning, which I have not had a good segue for this entire time, is you said you worked with Steve Ditko on Machine Man. I think you actually did on Speedball also for a bit.
Yeah.
What was he like? What was he like to work with? I've read a bit about him, and I just like it seems like a very odd dude, but I love his art so much.
Steve, I've read a lot about him too, and every time I read about him, I think this is not the guy I know or knew. Steve was a very personable guy. He liked to discuss philosophy and liked to discuss the events of the day, and we would often have long, intricate conversations about all sorts of things, movies, books, politics, whatever. I found him very personable, very friendly. I used to keep a coffee pot in my office, and he would often stop by and pour himself a cup of coffee, and we'd just chat and stuff like that. Very friendly. I read about how he's supposed to be, antisocial and an iconoclast. I never saw it.
Interesting.
But and of course, a fabulous storyteller.
Yeah.
He could weave the story like nobody's business.
And some of the most expressive faces I've ever seen in comics. So just everything about it. I just love his work so much. Cool.
Yeah, true master.
All right. Well, I think we're getting towards the end of the hour. So if anybody has questions for Tom, let's rattle those off pretty quickly here, so we can respect his time and all that. Yeah, we'll get towards wrapping up. I've not read your Thor run yet. That's something that is on. I know. It's on my list to do. You want a bigger outrage? I've not read Walter Simonson's Thor run yet. Don't tell anybody. So
that is a bigger outrage.
Yeah. So
I was a big fan of Walt's stuff.
Yeah, I've read his Ragnarok, his recent stuff, and it is absolutely beautiful. Some of the best comics I've seen in a long time, and doesn't have anything to do with superheroing, but it's a wonderful take on that sort of Thor mythology. And then we got a question right here. What was it like to write Thor and Fantastic Four? And you came after Walt on both of those, didn't you?
Oh, both of those books. Never learned my darn lesson, did I? Thor was an odd thing, because around that time, the editor of Thor, a gentleman by the name of Ralph Macchio, this is months after Ron Friends and I had been taken off of Spider-Man, and we found out that Daredevil was coming open, and Ralph was looking for a team for Daredevil. So Ron and I talked, and we said, let's pitch for Daredevil. So I went into Ralph and I said, Ralph, I hear you need a writer and an artist for Daredevil. Ron and I would like to, come up with some ideas and see if you're interested. And he said, oh, you guys would probably be very good for that. And he goes, but right now, Thor is very late, and I need to get a film for Thor, so I got to concentrate on Thor. And I said, you need a film for Thor? You need a film. Ron and I can do a film. We can do a film on anything. So to help Ralph get his deadline, we did a film for Thor. And then as we're trying that up, I came in and said, do you want us to put together our ideas about Daredevil? He said, no. What I need you to do is do another Thor film. Because, like I said, it's very late. And, you guys are going to help me get it on schedule. Okay, fine. So we did a second film. And then Ralph said to me, yeah, listen, I want you guys to do a book for me. I said, terrific. He said, Thor. I said, Thor? We can't do Thor. We don't do cosmic. He said, you just did 2 issues. I said, yeah, but they're fillers. I said, we can do a fill-in on anything in the line, but I don't know if we can do Thor. And I called up Ron, and I said to him, Ron, Ralph wants us to do Thor. He goes, really great. I love Thor. And I said, yeah, but I don't know if we have any, if we can do cosmic stories. And Ron said to me, "Well, you're a writer. Come up with something." And I thought, okay. So our first, we did 2 issues, which I consider fill-ins. But our first real story was this thing with the Celestials, because I thought, well, that's a cosmic concept. The Celestials. We'll do a Celestial story. And we did that.
So I don't do cosmic to like, let's get in the deep end, huh?
I mean, why not? That's, that's how I do everything. It's, hey, it's a challenge. I've never done that before. Okay. See, anytime anybody approaches me with an assignment, I look and say, I've never done anything like this before. As I say those words, I know, oh, great. Now I'm stuck doing it. And, so doing Thor was a blast. Fantastic Four, the sales on Fantastic Four were going down on the newsstand. And I didn't want to be the editor-in-chief at Marvel who had to take Fantastic Four off the newsstand. And Ralph said to me, well, why don't you and Ron leave Thor and go over to Fantastic Four? And I spoke to Ron, and we were doing Eric Masterson. You haven't read Thor, so you don't know who he is. But we had this whole soap opera about Eric Masterson. Ron said to me, I can't leave Eric in the middle of his story. I thought, yeah, I don't think I can leave Eric either. And and I went back to Ralph and I said, I don't know, I can't. We can't leave Thor now. And he said, well, do you think you could do 2 books a month? And I said, Ralph, I'm editor-in-chief. I'm already working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, and then somebody came in and heard this discussion and said, don't be ridiculous. There's no way you could do it. And as soon as somebody said, there's no way I could do it, I thought, well, so I'm getting 5 hours of sleep a night. I could probably cut that down to 4 and still be able to function. And I was also doing some non-comic book work, and I thought, I can cut some of that out. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to give it a try. And then I called. We spoke to a couple of artists, and Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan decided that he'd like to do it. And I loved Paul. I loved his work. And I said to him,
me too.
And I said, Paul, we're going to try to make this the craziest roller coaster ride in comic books. And I told you how I have a chart for characters to keep track of their soap operas. The Fantastic Four chart was going up the side of my wall, across my ceiling, down the other side. It was a very complicated chart. But we just wanted to throw everything in the kitchen sink into that issue, and
I picked that up with issue 400 because it was bright and shiny, and so that's where I came on board. And yeah, I remember I didn't know who any of these characters were. There were so many of them, and it was like, what? But I still liked it. And especially my favorite part was the Elijah and Johnny relationship, because it felt like a forbidden romance sort of deal. And I just thought that was so great. How did people react to her being a Skrull when that first came out? Was that a outrage moment?
Well, I believe it was an outrage moment. Here's the funny thing about Fantastic Four. While Paul and I were on the Fantastic Four, everybody claimed they hated the book. They didn't like the dialogue. They didn't like what we're doing with the characters. They hate the book, that sort of thing. But every month sales would go up. So, and I used to say, well, people hate the book so much they want all their friends to hate it just as much as they do. And I found out that a lot of readers just didn't like the fact that, every month things got worse for the Fantastic Four. We never let up on the characters. We just piling up.
I remember being so shocked, and I had to be 12, right? And I saw Reed Richards, like, when they found him, and he's all scraggly and he looks like he's like hasn't eaten in 6 months, and they finally found him again. And it's like, wow, Reed Richards really is just a train wreck.
But I come from the school that our job is to just make our characters' lives miserable, and yet be uplifting about it.
And yet be uplifting about it. Beautiful.
And so, like I said, sales went up every month, and we were very, very lucky. We had a great time on the book.
Onslaught really upset me because it just erased all of that for me, and that was one of those moments. But oh well.
And it had to do with the sales of the book. It had to do with the stock price.
I know. Yeah.
It was just
that's another hour-long story, I'm sure.
Well, the funniest part is they brought back the Image guys, and then, they're going to stimulate sales. Well, the first couple of issues did, and then after that they started going down. And the sales that Paul Ryan and I had, we were outselling Jim Lee for most part. It was,
and I loved the art when I got to it, and I saw it, and I just saw, like, this is kind of just a retelling of the origin. So, as a 12-year-old with a limited allowance, it's like, okay, I'll just save it to make sure I can get the whole Spider-Man line, and that's kind of where it went. Yeah. Oh,
fun and game.
So Johnny Torch asks, what was your favorite book character to write and why?
That is an impossible question to answer, because I'm going to give you guys the secret to writing in a few minutes. Spider-Girl, Thunderstrike, all those characters. I cared very deeply about each of those characters, and I loved them when I was writing them. And I as a writer, I either throw myself 100% into it, or I walk away from the assignment. So I was fully committed to Spider-Girl, fully committed to Thunderstrike. Some characters were a lot easier to write than others. Spider-Girl, much easier to write because I knew she was my niece. And a lot of conversation she had with Peter Parker I stole from listening to my niece talk to my brother.
So you literally wrote your niece into Marvel Comics.
I literally wrote my niece into Marvel Comics.
Nice.
Thor was the biggest pain in the neck because, I'd write it out in hard-boiled detective dialogue, and then I'd have to translate it into Asgardian. But I love the character. I love Thor. I love Eric Masterson. I love all the supporting casts, because that's the secret of writing.
Absolutely.
You have to care about what you're doing. Another question, just
sorry, I just put it up real quick. Just so Captain Cummings asks, what age did you start reading comics, and were they appropriate or the violent bad crime comics? And what did you enjoy back then?
Well, I started with comics, reading comic strips, and I used to cut the strips out of the newspapers and make my own comic books. I don't know how old I was when I started, maybe 6 or 7, and I just loved the medium. And somewhere along the line, one of my cousins, I think it was my cousin John, gave me a Batman comic book. And I was maybe age 8, 9, 10, something like that. And I remember Batman scared the hell out of me. But I loved the concept of the comic book. And I soon discovered that they were selling those comic books at the local candy store and that sort of stuff. And I was hooked ever since. I just loved comic books. I think I was outgrowing them by the time I was 11 or 12. And that's when I happened to show up at a newsstand and saw copies of Fantastic Four 3 and 4, which I picked them both up together, read them, and I fell in love yet again. And
absolutely, that Kirby Fantastic Four stuff is so unbelievable. Yeah,
never looked back. I still love those old comics. I still, these days I pull out the Masterworks and reread those old things, and the Dollar Comic, True Believer Comics, that sort of stuff. Excuse me.
You're excused.
Oops.
Well, you won't miss that call ever.
Well,
that's loud.
Oh no, I'm gonna miss that call because
Oh,
I know who that is.
So George asked, the Machine Man came out in 2001, a Space Odyssey adaptation. Will you ever go back to the beginning? Not sure what that means there, but
well, I recently got a trade paperback from Marvel that collected all the Kirby stuff, and the Ditko stuff, and I'm a Jack Kirby geek, so I went back to the first Machine Man. I did not go back to the 2001 because I don't think that was in that.
Yeah, they don't have the license to that, so that's why they cut that out of the collection there, unfortunately. But yeah.
But as a reader, yes, I go back.
I just read Kirby's. Somebody just released a bunch of unreleased Kirby stories called Dingbat Love, and he had a romance series he was trying to get off the ground at DC in the 70s, which was a true life divorce romance. It's romance. It's like anti-romance, and very bizarre, but it was very good too. So Kirby was an idea factory. He just came up with idea after idea and just threw it against the wall, see what worked, what didn't work. I think I ordered that book. I just haven't gotten it yet. That Dingbat Love, because like I said, I'm a Kirby geek. I love that stuff. So yeah, me too.
I'm looking forward to checking that out.
Cool. Yeah, let me know what you think when you get it. Cool. All right. Tom's book that's out right now is Machine Man. This is on stands in comics. Support Tom. He came to talk to us, so buy his book, right? I think that's fair. It's a fair exchange.
Yeah. Nah, you don't have to buy the book.
Buy the book.
Read your friend.
And I'll shill myself. I haven't shilled myself the whole stream because I try not to do that when I have too many guests on. But I've got my Kickstarter up, which the link is down in the description below, for Dynamite Thor. This is a reimagining of a public domain superhero from 1951. His powers are that he's immune to explosives. And so he propels himself through the air with dynamite blasts. You might recognize the art on here. It's by a guy, Ron Friends, who he worked with a couple times. And so if you're into the old DeFalco Friends stuff, hopefully I did well with this. Cool.
If you got Ron to do it, you have to, because Ron is very concerned about storytelling. Yeah,
and he just did the most beautiful heroic pose I could have possibly imagined. This is just I was talking about this with a reviewer of the Comic Book Hut, and how this is this is just comic art 101 right here on how to draw something beautiful. Very excited to have that. So check it out, guys. And that's it, I think. Do you got anything else?
I just want to thank all the readers out there for supporting me for all these years. I really do appreciate it, because I had a blast.
Awesome. We appreciate you. And still, after an hour, I still think you're the best comic writer of all time. So we're going to go with that. And I will see you guys soon. Tomorrow, I have Mike Barron on, who wrote The Punisher in the late 80s. You were editor-in-chief when he was on The Punisher there. So, I'm excited to talk to him. He's got a new project out also that he wants to promote. So I will see you guys soon.
Sounds good.